Diddy was arrested in New York back on September 16th. He was hit with some pretty serious charges, including sex trafficking. And get this, he was denied bail. But I think what really has everyone talking is, well, the potential Kardashian connection.
Yeah, it's like one of those things you can't look away from. And you're right, the Kardashian link just adds this whole other level to it.
Guy, how deep did their relationship with Diddy really go
to
like fully grasp this whole thing? We got to rewind way back. I'm talking early 2000s, even before the Kardashians blew up.
You're talking about a time when their social circles were already, well, they were mixing with some pretty important people. Remember that picture of Kim Kardashian at Diddy's white party in 2006 with Paris Hilton, of all people? We're not talking about some random party here. This was the event to be seen at.
I've seen those photos. It really shows you the world they were already part of, even back then. But why was being seen at those parties so important? Especially for someone like Kim, who was still building her brand at the time.
Well, you got to remember, in Hollywood, who you know is just as important as what you know, sometimes even more so. Think about it. Diddy, this guy was known for his lavish parties and his connections. Being associated with him, that's like instant clout. It raises your profile. It opens doors to new deals and opportunities. And for the Kardashians, this family that was laser focused on building their brand, those connections, they were pure gold.
It's like everyone's playing the strategic game. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Exactly. And you know what? As the Kardashians' own star power grew, so did their value in these circles. They weren't just guests anymore. They were a hot commodity.
So it wasn't just like a one-time thing showing up at Diddy's parties. We're talking about multiple sightings throughout the years, 2008, 2009, mostly Kim and Khloe, popping up at some pretty high-profile events with Diddy. Would you say they were becoming part of his inner circle?
It definitely seems that way. Yeah. And then there was that interesting little moment on Kris Jenner's talk show back in 2012. Diddy makes that "once you go black, you never go back" comment to Kris. Everyone kind of laughed it off at the time.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Seemed harmless enough then.
Yeah, it did. But looking back now with these allegations, it hits a little different.
It really does.
It's like maybe we got a glimpse of something we weren't supposed to see.
Hindsight's a funny thing, isn't it? But it just goes to show how easy it is to miss those red flags, especially in those glamorous circles where everything seems perfect.
Speaking of which, Khloe Kardashian kind of spilled the tea about those parties back in 2014. Remember that episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians?
Oh, yeah. How could I forget? She straight up said, and I quote, "I think half the people there were butt naked."
I haven't been to bed yet.
You haven't? I want to be Khloe when I grow up, Court.
I got on a plane at 5:30 a.m. Go to this party. I think half the people there were butt naked. You would have loved it.
Okay, I'll admit that's not something you hear every day. Makes you wonder about the dress code for these gatherings. But seriously, was that like normal for these Hollywood parties? Or was that a sign that things were maybe getting a little out of hand?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And Khloe, she didn't stop there. She name-dropped a couple other guests who were there. Quincy Jones. And wait for it, Justin Bieber.
Now that's an interesting mix. Music legends, teen heartthrobs, reality TV royalty, all under one roof. What was Diddy going for here? Like some kind of social experiment?
That guest list is wild. It's like he was trying to create a very specific image, this collision of power and celebrity. And for the Kardashians to be right in the middle of that, well, that's prime real estate for building their brand.
And they were front and center at his birthday party in 2015. We saw photos. Chris Courtney, even Corey Gamble was there. But here's the thing.
That party was in 2015. And that's important because it's before the alleged time frame, for those freak-offs that were outlined in the indictment.
Oh, you're right. Okay, so we've got the Kardashians hanging out with Diddy during this very specific period. But what are these freak-offs exactly? And how do they connect back to those parties we were just talking about? Are we talking about something more intense than, Khloe's description of half-naked party guests?
The allegations are pretty disturbing, honestly. The indictment claims these freak-offs were planned events. Like they were organized and involved commercial sex workers. And even more concerning is that these events were allegedly recorded.
Whoa, okay, so this is serious stuff. We're not talking about just a party that got a little out of control. These are some very serious potential charges here.
Exactly, and it's important to be clear about what we're talking about legally speaking. This isn't about judging anyone's personal choices. Sex trafficking involves exploitation and coercion. Those are very serious crimes.
Right, and just to reiterate, Diddy hasn't been found guilty of anything yet. But those rumors about the freak-offs, they're everywhere. People are drawing a direct line back to those parties.
Yeah, I get it. It's natural to connect the dots. But we have to remember, nothing concrete links those events to any illegal activity. At least not yet. There's a lot of speculation going around.
Except for that one thing from the articles, right? Something about how some of the parties didn't actually start as freak-offs. Like maybe they kind of evolved as the night went on.
Right, that detail is interesting. The article quotes a source close to the Kardashians, and they claimed that some parties only turned into freak-offs, like in the early morning hours when most people had left.
Okay, so maybe not the kind of party you'd bring your grandma to, but it definitely makes you wonder about the timeline. And who knew what? If these freak-offs were happening later, more privately, would the Kardashians have even known about it?
That's the big question. And the response, or at least what we're hearing through the grapevine, well, it's been interesting to say the least.
Total panic mode, right? The source said they're scrambling, denying any involvement, claiming they were totally in the dark about anything illegal going on.
Which, from a legal standpoint, that's a very important stance for them to take. If it turns out they knew about illegal activities and didn't say anything, well, they could be facing legal trouble themselves.
Okay, so let's play devil's advocate for a second. Is it really possible they were clueless? We're talking about a family that's famous for their business sense and their image control. Would they really risk everything by associating with something so obviously illegal?
That's a good point. I mean, on the one hand, we have their carefully crafted image to consider. It doesn't really make sense for them to throw their empire away, especially not for something like this.
But on the other hand, it's Hollywood. We've seen enough movies to know that things aren't always what they seem behind closed doors.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating. We're forced to confront this underbelly of fame and fortune. Are there different rules for the rich and famous? Are there secrets lurking beneath these glamorous parties?
And what about the people stuck in the middle of it all? It's easy to get swept up in the excitement, the allure of exclusivity. But where do you draw the line? It's like we're looking at two completely different worlds. The one we see in the tabloids, all glitz and glamour, and then the reality behind the scenes, which could be a lot darker.
Yeah, and that's really what this all boils down to, isn't it? We're talking about unchecked power and privilege, the blurry lines between what's okay and what's absolutely not.
And it makes you wonder just how common is this kind of behavior in these circles? Is this whole Diddy thing just the tip of the iceberg?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's a tough one. We know the investigation is still going on. Diddy says he's innocent. And the Kardashians haven't officially been connected to any wrongdoing.
Right. We got to remember, we're talking about allegations here, not proven facts. But even with that in mind, this whole situation has really brought to light a side of Hollywood. Well, a side that we don't really talk about that often.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that things aren't always so black and white. They're always shades of gray, especially when you're talking about fame and fortune.
Totally. As much as we love a good Hollywood scandal, it's important to remember there are real people at the center of this, with real lives that are being affected.
Absolutely. It's not just entertainment. It's a reminder of the complexities of power and influence, and the choices people make when they have them.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So where do we go from here? It feels like there's still a lot to uncover in this case.
There always is. That's how deep dives work, right? We start with a few pieces of the puzzle, and then we follow the trail wherever it might lead.
And sometimes those trails lead to some pretty unexpected places. We'll definitely keep you guys updated as this story develops. But until then, one thing's for sure, there's definitely more to this story than meets the eye.
Isn't there always? That's what makes these conversations so interesting. We're not just skimming the surface here. We're digging deeper, asking the tough questions, trying to make sense of a really complicated world.
Exactly, and we're doing it with you listening along. So until next time, stay curious, keep asking those questions. And remember, there's always more to discover.